Hello, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of What in the World is Going On. I'm your host, Brad Hurst. It's been a while since I've made some videos. I've been working on this current video for some time. We've been working really hard and diligently to try to gather information, a lot of observations in astronomy programs and what have you, talking to other individuals and reading news articles, news sources, and so forth. And so, but a lot of time put into this video. Before we get to the content of the video, we need to ask ourselves the question, what happened on September 23rd, 2017? Was that indeed the fulfillment of the great sign of Revelation chapter 12? Was it the fulfillment of it? I mean, did we see the fulfillment of that? And if that's the case, then what happened? Lots of people speculated that that would be the fulfillment of the rapture. But obviously the rapture did not happen. And to be honest with you, I would have leaned in that direction if it weren't for the help of others who were kind of keeping me on track and helped me to recognize that there were some other things that of necessity needed to take place. And so in my book, I specifically state that I did not think that the rapture would happen on that date, even though it was understandable for people to think that. So, but we need to ask ourselves the question, what happened? Well, I've sort of kind of been watching over the last, 4 or 5 years, trying to answer that particular question. And if you're like me, we've had a lot of time, specifically with COVID and what have you, and we've seen a lot of events develop in the world body politic, and also things take place inside the church as well. So, but before we get to that, I just kind of want to outline this video for you so you can know what to expect. It's going to be somewhat lengthy, but there's a lot of information in it. So we do need to ask ourselves what happened, but I think in order to be able to do that, we need to go way back in time, all the way back to the first year of creation, and look at the sky and see if maybe, quite possibly, we can answer the question, what did the Lord mean in Isaiah 46:10 when he says that he declared the end from the beginning? We have a little video presentation on that particular question right there. Then I have a series of whiteboard presentations, a total of 5. They average anywhere from 2 to about 4 minutes a piece. I find these to be, shall we say, necessary to help explain what would follow the whiteboard presentations, which is going to be a video animation. And I think that when you look at the animation, you're going to suddenly realize you get a better idea of what's been going on over the last 6,000 years and why the sign of Revelation chapter 12 and the events of 2017 are really important. Then we're going to spend some time talking about the theology of polemics, how God, essentially co-opts the worldview of the unbeliever and uses their hubris against them, and sometimes appropriates it not only to himself, but also to his people. We're going to be looking at things, regarding, what it meant in the ancient world for kings to be appointed among the stars and the dragon and his tail and so forth. So all of these things are really important, and I think that you'll find them to be rather fascinating. And from there, we're going to look at a number of different news articles that cover a period from about July 2020 all the way up into about April 5th, 2022, talking about the current state of the church and what's been going on. So, and then we're going to kind of give you a reason why, why is the church in the position that it's at right now, and how long has this been going on? So a lot of information here. If the video is too long for you, you can break it up. We're going to do it in certain parts, and you'll be able to stop one section and pick up a bit later on. So a lot of information, but we're, as believers, we need to answer why. What happened on September 23rd, 2017? Why didn't the rapture happen then? Okay, was there something else that we should have been looking for? And like I stated, at that time, I postulated that quite possibly, there were some other things that needed to happen, and a lot of people were expecting the rapture, and I certainly would have liked for that to happen, but I had some hesitation as well. So the last 5 or 6 years there's been a lot of development over the whole course of the church, or the whole community of the church, and the whole body politic of the world. So, all right, so let's get into the first part of our video here and look at the issue of, declaring the end from the beginning. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, here's our first slide. The year is 4003 BC. It's October 27th. We're using 4003 BC because the astronomy software that we are using has the year 0 in it. Our reference point is Bishop Ussher's Chronologies of the World, and he uses 4004 BC, but because he doesn't use the year 0, we have to incorporate one additional year so that we make the adjustment for 1 year. Takes us to 4003 BC in our astronomy program. Now we're starting on the 4th day of creation, so you can see that the sun right here is 4 days out of what we call the fall equinox. Fall equinox sitting right here, and it's being occupied by Mercury. We're going to get to that in just a second. You can see the moon sitting over here in its 4th phase. The moon, had it been in position, had it been created on the 1st day of creation, it would have been sitting right about here, would have kind of rode up this arrow like this over the course of the 1st day of creation. But since the sun and the moon were not created until the 4th day of creation, we're going to start on the 4th day. And what we do see conspicuously sitting right here is the star, which they would have called a star, the star Mercury, which in Babylonian, Mesopotamian folklore was the star associated with covenants, redemption, and words, sitting right there on the what we call the fall equinox. Now, what's interesting about this is that this constellation here is the constellation of the restrainer. Mark this up here. This whole big constellation up and through here is the constellation of the restrainer. And you can see that his foot is crushing the head of the scorpion, but he's receiving a sting, or is going to receive a sting, as the scorpion is preparing to raise up his tail and sting the back heel of this. And what's interesting is right here, the sun is sitting in the position of our current winter solstice. And so you have a lot of good information right in here. We want to go and look at another star on this same day. Of course, we call them planets. It's the planet of Jupiter, and we're going to see what the planet of Jupiter is marking out on this same day. So let's go to our next slide. Here you can see the planet of Jupiter sitting right here on the first line of Pisces. It's very important because we're going to see here in a bit, this is the exact position of the sun during the time of Christ. During the vernal equinox, during the time of Christ, through the beginning of the early church, all the way to 70 AD with the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD. There you have it, right there. Sun sitting on that same exact line. The year is 1 BC, and it continues in this position all the way through 70 AD. Here we are at our first winter solstice. It happens to be 4002 BC. It's January 20th. We have the sun sitting here at its solstice point, and we have the new moon marking out the longitude and latitude line, as new moon's going to be moving through this area right through here, marking out the area of what's going to be our current spring equinox. You have Venus sitting here marking the same exact line where Jupiter would have been sitting. What's interesting about this is Jupiter would have been sitting right about down here, but Venus is in retrograde. So Venus is coming along this way like this, and then all of a sudden it turns around and starts going back like that. Okay, and then you see right here, you see Jupiter sitting very close to the position where the sun is going to be at during the time of the crucifixion, death, burial, and resurrection of Christ in April 3rd, 33 AD. So a lot of good stuff here. I don't think this stuff is a coincidence. Oh, in addition, you also see Mars sitting right up here, marking out the outpouring of waters. In fact, what's interesting is the constellation is Aquarius, and all the stars in Aquarius talk about the lucky ones of the king, and the stars associated with this constellation down here is those are stars whose names are associated with the lucky ones who drink. So I think you have a depiction here of the outpouring of the Holy Spirit in this first winter solstice of 4002 BC. Let's go ahead and get these out of here, and we'll go on to our next slide. Here we are at our first spring equinox. It's 4002 BC. It happens to be April 23rd. And what we want to look at here is not so much the sun. We want to look at the star. I believe that's actually Jupiter sitting right there. We'll look at the star Jupiter sitting in here and how it's lining up perfectly with the Pleiades right through here. This is really important because we're going to see here in a few minutes, or in the next slide or so, we're going to see that that's marking the position of the sun during the time of the first Exodus. And you see what I believe is Venus over here, marking out the position of the sun during the time of the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ in 33 AD. Not much to add here. There's the sun sitting right here in the exact spot where Jupiter was in the previous slide. The year is 1441 BC. It's 414. It's the first Passover. It's the advent of the Passover and the Exodus occurring in 1441 BC on the first Passover, April 14th. So is this stuff a coincidence? I find it hard to believe this is a coincidence. And you can see right here, you can see the sun sitting in the position that was marked out in the two slides before this. Sun sitting in the exact position where Christ, on the day where Christ was crucified. So the year is 33 AD, and it's April 3rd. Here we are in our first summer solstice. The year is 4002 BC. It's July 23rd, according to our calendar. You can see the woman there, the woman with her veil. She's pulling up her dress like a woman preparing to give birth. And you see this constellation right here. We're going to see a little bit later on that the constellation lines of this constellation, Leo, is going to mark out the crown of the woman. It's going to have 12 stars. And so both of these two constellations right here are Virgo and Leo. And Virgo is, she's got a veil. People mistake this often, this veil, with being a wings, but that's not what they are. It's actually her veil. We're going to find out later on that on September 23rd, 2017, the vernal equinox is going to be sitting right there. The woman's going to be crowned with she's going to be clothed with the sun. She's going to have crowned 12 stars. The moon's going to be under her feet over here, and she's going to be travailing as though she is preparing to give birth. So, in fact, let's go ahead and have a look at that slide here. We'll go and get rid of these markings here, and we'll go have a look at that slide. All right, so folks, here we are with the woman. You can see here it's September 23rd, 2017. It's you got the fall equinox sitting right here. You've got the woman. You wouldn't be able to see her. She'd be veiled with the sun. She's pulling up her dress as she's getting ready to give birth. She's got the moon under her feet over here. And you've got this crown of 12 stars right through here. Normally, there wouldn't be 12 stars in here, but over the course of about a year, you had 3 stars come in here. These, we call them planets. It would be Venus, Mercury, and Mars came in and filled in the gap, giving her a crown of 12 stars. In fact, you would have been able to see this exact, I saw this with my own eyes on September 23rd, 2017. I went out there and you could actually watch this crown come over the horizon. And at the right time, that was all you could see were 12 stars. Okay. And then later on, throughout the daytime, the woman's veiled with the sun. And in the evening time, you would be able to see the moon underneath her feet. And you look at this crown up here, you see the crown of the Egyptian kings. These crowns here were very common at the time when John spoke. This crown was known as a schema, and you can see the similarity in through here. It was what was given to the Egyptian king, showing that he was the ruler of the upper and the lower Nile, or what they called the heavens and the earth. And so you see this woman crowned with this crown right here, and that she's actually receiving her inheritance as it is as the heavens and the earth. And so this is I think this is very hard to ignore. In fact, there's one thing we're going to get to here in just a second, or not just a second, in a few minutes. When you go back to the depiction of this in 4002 BC, the dragon's tail just happens to be up right about here, about this position right here, in this area right here. And over time, the dragon's tail has dropped about 32 degrees over time. And we're gonna talk about that here at length, and we're gonna give you a video presentation on that that's going to kind of explain that at length to show you what's going on. So a lot of stuff here, a lot of information. I wish we could do a lot more. There's a lot more to this than what we've got, but I think for our purposes right now, this will do. So let's move on in our presentation. Okay, we want to take some time to look at how the Babylonians and the Jews understood the sky. Babylonian and Jewish astronomy was essentially the same. They used the same type of measurements and nomenclature. In fact, the Jews originated in Babylon, and they were deported into Babylon later on, heavily influenced by the Babylonians. And at the time of the writing of the book of Revelation, there were still very large communities of Jews living inside of Babylon. And so the Babylonian and the Jewish astronomy are essentially the same. They understood the word and the world empirically. They wrote empirically how things appeared. It did not mean that that's how they actually understood it scientifically. Okay, they did not think that there was a flat earth, but they did write and they did explain things empirically, how things appeared from the standpoint of a person standing on earth. Now, what is interesting about this is that we have this concept here of what's called a plane. Any place where you're standing, okay, if you're looking south, you're looking north, you're looking east, you're looking west, your field of view of the horizon is like a circle, okay, like this. And any place where you're standing on a flat plane, okay, that doesn't have mountains in the background, or if you're standing on the ocean, your total distance that you can actually see is about 3 miles, okay? You turn around, you can see another 3 miles. So you have a field of view of about 6 miles, okay? And that's what this plane, this circle right here represents your horizon. Your 3 miles is your total distance you can see, and your total field of view is about 6 miles. Now, if you're going to be marking out your cardinal points, north, south, east, and west, the most efficient way of doing that is simply just be marking out your northern section, your southern section, eastern section, and western section, and marking them out with straight lines. And when they did that, you end up with a square, and this is what they called the 4 corners of the earth. Very basic, very simple, very easy to understand. It does not mean that they thought that the earth was flat in any way, shape, or form, that the earth was a cube. Okay, that's not how they understood the earth to be constructed, but that's the way it appeared empirically, and so they always wrote empirically. Okay, so that's what we've got. This very simple, very basic, the idea of a plane and the horizon, your field of view, your 4 corners of the earth. Okay, so let's go on to our next concept here. Now, again, we have our plane right through here. This is our plane right here. What I've done is, instead of it being in a circle, I've turned it and flattened it and put it on its side. So this here is our plane right through here. Again, they did not think of the world as being a flat earth. They wrote empirically. That's how they actually wrote. Okay, so what we've done here is we've written in such a way as they wrote, and we've diagrammed it for you. So here's your north, and here's your south, here's your east, and your west. That would be your four corners of the earth. But now we've added something in here by flattening this plane and leveling it out, giving it kind of like a three-dimensional kind of concept here, or view here. And then we've diagrammed this out. What they did is, during the daytime, when they looked up and they saw the blue sky, it looked like water. So what do you think they called it? They called it the waters above, okay? And everywhere you go, if you're standing, wherever you're standing, you look straight up, you're always going to have a zenith right over the top of you, 360-degree view all the way around here, and always going to get this dome-looking effect, okay? No matter where you go, you're always going to have this dome-looking effect. And what ends up happening is that depending on where you're standing, especially at nighttime, depending on where you're standing, the stars that cross the top of the dome are going to change based on where you're at on the planet. If you're, if you're further north, the North Star is going to be up here, and if you're further south, the North Star is going to drop down further, and then you're going to see different stars passing over at nighttime at the zenith point. So, and also the position of the sun is going to be different as well. So, so they called this blue sky the waters above, and because if you're on the ocean, the line of demarcation, the horizon, waters above the horizon, waters below the horizon would actually be the oceans. And then they, no matter wherever you're at, whether you're on dry land or on the ocean, they still called everything below the horizon the waters below. So basic concept right here, your four cardinal points, north, south, east, and west. You're standing, with the horizontal plane right here instead of our bird's eye view that we had with the circle. You've got your dome. Wherever you go, you always have the appearance of a dome over the top of you. You've always got a zenith, depending on where you're standing on the earth. Stars that pass over this zenith at nighttime are going to be different depending on where you stand on the planet Earth. This area here, the blue sky, it looked like water, so they called it the waters above. And if you're on the ocean, the horizon was the line of demarcation for the waters above or the waters below, which would actually be the ocean. And whether you're standing on dry land or on the ocean, everything below the horizon was called waters below. All right, let's go on to our next concept. You see right here, we've got, this is a diagram of the universe, how the Jewish astronomers and the Babylonian astronomers would have understood it. You've got your North Pole, you've got your South Pole, you've got what we call the celestial equator right through here. But if you'll notice, we also have what the winter solstice and the summer solstice. This is the ecliptic line as it's going across the sky throughout the course of the year. So you got your summer solstice and you've got your winter solstice right here, North Pole, South Pole. And if you notice, the terminology that we've got is essentially the same. We have what's called the waters above and the waters below, but we've added another word right here. This is what's called the heavenlies. We know that as the northern hemisphere. And then they had what was known as Sheol. We know that as the southern hemisphere, right? But look at this right here. I want you to look at this line right through here. You notice we have our celestial equator, which is what we call it. We call this the celestial equator. They did not call it that. They called it the Earth. Because if you remember, when we had our plane, our plane sitting like this, and the waters above and the waters below, whether you're on the ocean, you've got the sky and you got the ocean below, or you've got the earth and you've got the sky above. The earth is what actually separated the waters above from the waters below. And so they've got what we call the equatorial or the celestial equator, the equatorial line, they called the Earth. And this is going to be very, very helpful in helping us to understand what's going on in Revelation chapter 12 when it comes to the whole concept of the dragon. Well, here's interesting here is this is the heavenlies. In Babylonian lore, okay, when a king died, this was the place of the gods. When when a king died or a priest died, he was appointed a seat among the heavenlies. He was named after, given a position in the heavenlies. You know, a star would be associated with either, you know, a king or a priest. And then Sheol was associated with the wicked, and even at the time would have been the fallen angels or the fallen gods. So that's kind of the nomenclature that we see behind it. You have to understand that the Bible uses what's called polemics quite often. It takes the worldview of the pagan and the unbeliever and essentially co-opts it and uses it against them. So you'll see some of this language, you know, when it comes to talking about the saints and so forth, being seated in the heavenlies or shining like the stars and what have you. So this is kind of sort of how they structured the universe. You got, you know, essentially you got this circle here. You've got your celestial equator, what they call the earth, because it's functioning like the earth did, separating the waters above from the waters below. Of course, you've got and you got the concept of the heavenlies and Sheol and your summer solstice and your winter solstice. And so really basic. Okay, there's a lot more to this, but I'm just trying to keep this as simple as possible. Don't want to overwhelm people and get people lost. So all right, let's go ahead and move on to our next concept. All right, now this can get very complicated, so I want you to just bear with me as we try to go through this and do what we can to simplify things as much as possible. Also, I apologize for the reflections that you can actually see on our screen here. We've got a lot of light and stuff and effects in here and windows and what have you, but there's really not much I can do about it. But anyway, so we're going to look at something a little bit different here. We basically have kind of stretched out our universe. We see just a portion of the sky. You can see we have our celestial equator, which is the green line going through here, and we've marked it as the Earth because that's what they called it, and they called that the Earth. This would be the heavenlies or the northern hemisphere. This would be the Sheol or the depths, which would be the southern hemisphere. We have our fall equinox right here. The year it's October 27th. 4003 BC. If you've been watching this video at the very beginning, you understand why we're using that year. This is the fourth day of creation. We have the sun would actually be sitting like right in this area right through here, but we're not interested in the sun right now. What we're interested is this character right here, which is the person, or shall we say, the constellation of Hydra. All right, so there's a lot of things that are going to take place. I want to kind of explain it to you, and then we're going to give you an illustration, an animated illustration, so you can understand and watch what John actually saw. So what we have right here is we have Leo, the constellation here. We've got Virgo right here. We've got Libra right here. We've got Scorpio is sort of half and half. He's got half of himself is down in the lower parts of the waters below, and half of himself is in the upper parts. We've got Sagittarius in the lower parts, and we've also got Capricorn in the lower parts. We have the restrainer up here. Okay, this is a constellation of a guy who's holding a giant serpent, and he's got his tail's going to be stung by a scorpion, but his head's getting ready to step on the head of the scorpion. So there's a lot of imagery there. We also have a constellation right here. It's called Corvus. This constellation is a crow. It sits on the tail of Hydra. In Babylonian literature, Corvus marks the area of the tail of Hydra, and it's very important, as we will see when we do our animation. So what is going to happen over time is we're going to get some rotation. We're going to get rotation right here that's going to go counterclockwise. And as a result of that, the tail of the dragon is going to start to drop down, and it's going to drop down a total of about 32 degrees from its position, which is about 5 degrees above the equatorial line, or the Earth is what we call it. And as it drops down, we got this rotation taking place, and the head of the dragon, the head is actually facing down, and the head of the dragon is going to rise up like this, okay? And as this tail drops down, we're going to see Virgo is going to be brought down with the dragon. Half of Virgo is going to be dropped down below the line. Libra is going to be dropped down. Scorpio is going to be dropped way down. In fact, Scorpio is going to be pulled down about 27 degrees. Sagittarius is going to be pulled down about 27 degrees, but Capricorn just can kind of spin around like this. Okay, so the animation is going to be more helpful for you, but I'm kind of explaining what's going on. Now you see this other spiraling right here. So over here, well, we have counterclockwise spiraling taking place over here, and this section of space coming down like this. Over here, we have clockwise spiraling taking place right through here, and the section of space is coming down like this. And so what's interesting about this is that as these areas are coming down, the rest of space is either staying put or it's actually rising. Fascinating concept. You'll be able to see some of that in our animation. But I want to go to our next little whiteboard illustration for you before we get to our animation. All right, this is the last of our whiteboard presentations. I wanted to do this before we put our animation in to help explain what you're going to see in the animation. You can see here it's September 23rd, 2017, and our fall equinox has moved from this position to over here in Virgo. Originally, it was right over here where the restrainer is at, but now it's actually over here in Virgo. So there's been a lot of movement over the last 6,000 years. We've got our rotations been going on over the last 6,000 years, the counterclockwise here, the clockwise here, and the net result of that is that the head of Hydra has raised up, its tail has dropped down. In fact, it's dropped down for a total of about 32 degrees, and as it's been dropping down, the tail has empirically given the impression as though it's been pulling down portions of Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, and restrainer with it. The net result of that is that we have essentially 8 hours of space, each hour being 15 degrees of distance here, or for a total of 120 degrees, or 1/3 of the sky has essentially been pulled down by, by the appearance of the tail of Hydra been pulling down 1/3 of the sky. Virgo was up here, Libra was up here, Scorpio was kind of straddling this area, the restrainer was up here, Sagittarius was further up here. So we've had 1/3 of the sky, or more specifically, 1/3 of the heavenlies has been pulled down over the course of the last 6,000 years. And it essentially ended with the vernal equinox being right here, where we saw that the Virgin Virgo receives her crown of 12 stars, and the sun and the moon under her feet and what have you, and all of that, as we've mentioned previously in previous videos. So anyway, just go ahead and take this, kind of take this in. The tail of the dragon, or the tail of Hydra, the 7-headed dragon that's got horns and it's got 7 crowns on its 7 heads, according to ancient Babylonian literature. His tail has, over the last 6,000 years, has been pulling down this portion of space, and it has been crowned off by the vernal equinox of September 23rd, 2017, where the woman received her crown of 12 stars, and she was clothed with the sun, and the moon was underneath her feet. So a lot of good stuff here. I think this is pretty powerful apologetic for the scriptures, and to be honest with you, I think this is really difficult for a lot of people to try to get around. When we think like the world of the Bible, it's amazing how much more the world of the Bible clears up, and how much the Bible itself actually clears up. So, all right, so let's go ahead and get into our animation. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. You have the whole thing presented right there. We've watched 6,000 years of the sky. We've watched over time as the dragon's tail has slowly been moving and pulling a third of the stars along with it, pulling them down below the earth and putting them in that in the position that they currently are in right now. In the meantime, the dragon's head's been rising. And we have sort of like the culmination of it all telling us, you know, the signal telling us when to begin to look for the fulfillment that these things are typifying. We see that in the sign of the woman who's crowned with the sun's got the crown of 12 stars, or she's clothed with the sun's got a crown of 12 stars, and she's got the moon under her feet. I think that this is pretty hard to ignore. I mean, there's no making this stuff up. It's there. We've basically tracked it for you. We put it out here for you. We show you how in the ancient world was watching a similar pattern of this and what have you. And I believe that the Bible is telling us, specifically the book of Revelation is telling us what the sky in the night sky, the evening sky, the morning sky is going to look like when everything is set and ready to get going. I think this is a death blow to preterism, because I don't think that any portion of the book of Revelation could have been fulfilled back in 70 AD, because the movement of the dragon's tail had only gone through 2/3 of its motion. I think it's a death blow to historicism, which would say that this has been fulfilled, or the book of Revelation has been fulfilled over time with different historical events over the course of the last 2,000 years, because for the same reason, the dragon's tail had not moved through its proper course yet. And specifically, the sign of the woman had not showed up. I think it's also a death blow to the idea of imminence, the way that we understand it, that the idea that the rapture could have happened at any time since the ascension of Christ, or since the first century church, again, for the same reasons. The dragon's tail wasn't in position, the stars weren't in position, and the sign of the woman hadn't showed up. So I think that this is very prohibitive to some very dominant eschatological schools out there and forms of thinking when it comes to understanding eschatology. So, you know, like I said earlier, that, you know, the Bible uses what's called polemics. The idea of polemics is that God uses the myth and the lore, and in some cases the fears of the ancients against them, against the pagans, against the heathens and what have you. We see a perfect example of that in Egypt when God mocked the Egyptian gods during the 10 plagues of Egypt. And when that type of polemical type of thought takes place all throughout the Old Testament and even into the New Testament. And I think there are some polemics that are being put on display here as well. I think the book of Revelation has at least 4 or 5 different places that got polemics in it, but we don't want to spend time getting into that because that's not the purpose of this video. The purpose of this video is to ask ourselves the question, what happened with regard to Revelation 12 and the events of September 23rd, 2017. So, you know, in speaking of polemics, you know, you look in Daniel chapter 8, verse 10. I think this is a parallel passage to Revelation 12. We see a case here where we're told that the little horn is going to wax great even to the host. The word there, host, means prepared armies for battle. It's going to wax great against the host of heaven and cast some of the host and of the stars to the ground and stamp upon them. All right. I think that's a parallel passage. All right. You look at the explanation of this is found in verse 24. It says, and his power shall be mighty, but not his own power, and he shall destroy wonderfully and shall prosper and practice and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. Daniel sees the vision. He wants to know what's going to happen, and he's getting the explanation of the vision. And the explanation of verse 10 is found in verse 24. But this is not the only place in the book of Daniel that actually talks about stars and equating them with the saints. We see this in Daniel chapter 12, verse 2-3. And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. They that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. So you see that, at least in the book of Daniel, you can see that, that the stars tend to be a simile for the righteousness of the saints, or for the saints themselves. This is carried on into 1 Corinthians chapter 15, where you see the statement here talking about the resurrection of the glorified body. There is one glory of the sun, the other glory of the moon, and one glory of the stars. For one star, this is important, one star differs from another star in glory. And so also is the resurrection of the dead. It is sown in corruption, it is raised in incorruption. It is sown in dishonor, it is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power. It is sown a natural body, is raised a spiritual body. There is natural body and there's a spiritual body. So the resurrection body is going to be raised in glory, but the glory between each resurrection body is going to differ, just like the stars do. In the ancient world, when the kings were buried, and if they died with honor and given honors, they were appointed a position in the heavenlies where they sat among the gods, which is the realm of the upper portions of the heavens, the northern hemisphere. And they depending on their power, their rank, their influence, they would be given either a very dim star or they'd be given a very bright star, depending on how they were viewed as in their kingship. And it's the same thing we see here in the scriptures, is that one star differs from another, and the net result of that, or shall we say the comparison here is that the resurrection is going to be the same. Everyone's going to be raised with the glorious body, but the glory of each one is going to be different from one. Some are going to shine very dimly, depending upon their righteousness and their works and what have you. Some are going to be shine very bright. And what's interesting is the scriptures tells us in Ephesians chapter 2 that unlike the kings in their lifetime, they did not receive their position in the heavenlies until after they died. But according to Ephesians chapter 2, it says that he has raised us up together and made us to sit together in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus, that in the ages come we might show the exceeding riches of his grace and his kindness towards us through Christ Jesus. So unlike the kings in the past, they had to wait until they got their heavenly seat, but we already have ours. All right, we're already the stars. We're already shining, or supposed to be shining. What I get a kick out of a passage in Revelation chapter 2, talking about the church of Thyatira. Look at this passage right here, talking about the church of Thyatira and the problems they had. He says, notwithstanding, I have a few things against thee, because thou sufferest that woman Jezebel, which calls herself a prophetess, to teach and seduce my servants to commit fornication and to eat things sacrificed to idols. This is going to be important. And they gave her space to repent of her fornication, and she repented not. Behold, I will cast her into a bed, and them that commit adultery with her into great tribulation, except they repent of their deeds. I will kill her children with death, and all the churches shall know that I am he which searches the reins and hearts, and I'll give unto every one of you according to your works. But unto you I say, and unto the rest in Thyatira, as many as have not this doctrine, and which have not known the depths of Satan, as they speak, I will put no other burden. I'll put upon you no other burden. But that which ye have already hold fast till I come. And he that overcometh and keepeth my works unto the end, to him I'll give power over the nations, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron. Okay, that's a promise unto the church. You see that fulfilled in Revelation 12 as well. Okay, he shall rule them with a rod of iron, as the vessels of the pottery, they shall be broken to shivers, and even as I received of my Father. And I will give him the morning star. The morning star is the brightest star in the sky. Three brightest objects in the sky is the sun, the moon, and the morning star, which is Venus. And he's telling us that here's how you get the morning star. Stop polluting yourself with the world. Stop polluting yourself with the world. Get rid of that porn. Okay? Get rid of everything that is a distraction. Get rid of that relationship. Get rid of whatever it is you need to get rid of that's basically keeping you and hindering your walk with God. Stop polluting yourself with the world. If you do that, you're going to shine very brightly. I'm going to give you the morning star. Right? That's what we're looking at when it comes to the issue of polemics, the idea of polemics in the scriptures. You see that the saints, like the kings in the ancient world, are going to be seated among the heavenlies, and we're going to be the shining stars. There are some stars that shine very dimly. They're 6.5 on the scale. And then there are some stars that shine very brightly, get all the way up to -1 and 2. They get very bright. And so we want to be a bright and shining star. So what do we see in Revelation 12? Well, what we see is that we see that the dragon does a couple different things. Okay, first of all, he rises. His tail draws away a third of the stars. Okay, that statement is not found in Daniel chapter 8. In Daniel chapter 8, it just says that he cast down some of the stars of the host, and he tramples them underfoot. All right, but the parallel passage, Revelation 12, says that before he casts them down, he draws them away. That word "draw away" there, it's talking about an enticement, a luring, a seducing away. Okay, and specifically in the English, one of the definitions for drawing away is it uses the statement that it's talking about an argument or persuasion. Okay, the idea of actually drawing somebody through argumentation and persuasion. And what do we see in the scriptures? All right, in the scriptures, we see in the scriptures that we're told that in the Spirit expressly says that in the latter times, this is 1 Timothy chapter 4. Now the Spirit speaks expressly that in the latter times, some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, we're told this. He says, "Now we beseech you, brethren, by the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and by our gathering together unto him, that you be not soon shaken in mind or troubled, neither by spirit nor by word, nor by letter as from us, as that the day of Christ is at hand. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and the man of sin, the son, be revealed, the son of perdition." All right, so the scriptures are very clear that there's going to be seducing spirits that can come along that are going to pull people away. It's going to draw them away. It's very clear that before the day of the Lord and our gathering together unto him, there's going to be a falling away. And also there's going to be the rise of the man of sin. What do we see in Revelation chapter 12? Revelation chapter 12, we see the woman, we see the dragon standing. The dragon's already there. Even before the woman brings forth, before the sign of the woman, the dragon's already in place. He's drawn away some of the stars and he's cast them down the earth astronomically. We see that. Okay, that took place over the course of 6,000 years. But Jesus says that regarding Revelation, that the events of Revelation, those events are going to take place very quickly in a very short period of time. All right. And so what do we see? Well, we see the sign of the dragon, and we see that the sign of the woman already took place. And so we ask ourselves the question, what happened? Well, obviously the rapture didn't happen. A lot of people thought that was going to happen. And I certainly would have leaned in that direction, but we have these passages telling us that before that happens, there has to be this drawing away. There has to be this apostasy, this seducing. In Revelation 12, we actually see that illustrated. He says that the dragon draws the stars away. Okay, that's what we actually see. And then he casts them to the ground, or as it says in Daniel chapter 12, he casts them to the earth, right? Cast them to the earth. That word casting there, the word cast, it literally means, it's a wrestling term. It pins them to the ground, okay? And in Daniel 12, it says that he's going to trample them underfoot. But in Revelation chapter 12, we says that he actually goes after these people, and he's eventually given power over them, and he overpowers them. Okay, but they do defeat him by the word of their testimony. I believe that these are saints because they're stars. Okay, they're called stars. That these are actually saints who I believe that when rapture happens, they're not going to be counted worthy to escape, because they will have, according to what we see in Revelation chapter 2, they will have eaten meat sacrificed to idols. All right, they will have basically compromised themselves, polluted themselves, and we're told to stop doing that. Okay, so that we can shine like bright stars. These are people who have compromised themselves, and when that trumpet blows, okay, they're going to find themselves in a real pickle, because they will have thought that means everybody's going to go, but the scriptures make it abundantly clear. Jesus says He says you're supposed to watch and pray that you would be counted worthy. Okay, and Jesus even says in Revelation chapter 2, he says, look, if you don't stop eating meat sacrificed to idols, I'm going to throw you into tribulation. The purpose of tribulation, 22 passages in the scriptures talk about tribulation, specifically in the New Testament. Okay, all of those passages are talking about the purification of the saints. Okay, tribulation is for the purification of the saints. It's to prepare us and to make us ready for an event that we otherwise would not be ready for. Okay, specifically if we ourselves are in sin, that God's going to bring his discipline against us and work things in. And I think that the church is going to be so compromised that there's going to be a massive worldwide, shall we say, church discipline procedure to take place. Okay, and I think we actually see that in the book of Revelation. I realize that there's actually times of judgment in the book of Revelation, and believers don't go through that, but I just don't see that tribulation and judgment are necessarily the same thing. So what happened? Revelation chapter 12, the sun and the moon, the 12 stars, and what happened there? What has happened since then? Well, I've been watching a number of different news articles over the course of the last 5 years, but more specifically over the course of the last 3 years. And been watching, and I've sort of kind of been waiting to see if we were actually going to see something that would be significantly different than what we see in the course of history, an apostasy that's somewhat different. And I didn't want to be going around looking, trying to find something. I just wanted to keep watch and see what was going on. But as I was watching, this is, well, 2 years, this article is almost 2 years old now. This comes from the Barna Research Group, National Christian Foundation, July 16th, 2020. Okay, this is the title. 1 in 3 practicing Christians have stopped attending church altogether since the start of COVID. Okay, right out of the bat. Okay, right out of the chute. Okay, we're 1 in 3. That caught my attention back in 2020. All right. So I just held on to this article, and I kept reading, kept watching, and we end up with this article, which is almost about a year and a half later. This is the Institute for Family Studies, the decline of church attendance during COVID, January 20th, 2022. This year, according to data collected in April/May in 2020 by the Barna Group, 1 in 3 practicing Christians dropped out of church completely during COVID-19. Last June, the AP broke a story about many houses of worship in the US that were shuttered forever due to the pandemic. And here's the AP story down here with the headline, "Millions skipped church during the pandemic. Will they return?" Right, so this article, when you read this article, it goes to show that the numbers haven't changed. In fact, in some cases, they've gotten a bit worse, but the numbers have not changed. You got this article right here. COVID-19 has taken the toll of church going in America as the country shifts its view on religion. This comes from Globe and Mail, published January 23rd, 2022. This is this year. Long after the first pandemic lockdowns, many of the country's faithful appear to have lost the faith. Church leaders now estimate that 20 to 30% of the missing parishioners are unlikely to return to their places of worship. They have fallen away from church attendance, and they are not coming back. And this is after churches have opened. Okay, this article has come out. We have another article right here. We're going to come back to this article. This came out just recently. It was released before May, but it was posted on the Daily Wire. I believe it was May 5th, 2022. I just read this last week. This comes from a guy by the name of Michael Brown, who's an apologist, and he asked the question, why are so many Christians leaving the faith? It cannot be not denied that in unprecedented numbers, Christians are leaving the faith. From well-known pastors and worship leaders to Bible college professors and Christian rockers, we are experiencing a wave of apostasy. And I want to get to the primary reasons here. Primary reasons, sinful and material attractions, right? Sinful, yeah, I'm just going to say sexual, all right? I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Material attractions, okay? Big boats, cars, expensive cars, houses, vacations. And look at who's sitting on your elder boards. It's the money guys, all right? Okay, mistrust in church leadership, attacks on the integrity of the scriptures, the lack of deep biblical teaching. I have to tell you, I can't tell you a Bible study or Sunday school lesson I haven't been in the last number of years where they don't start off with something like, well, we're not going to get too deep into this. All right. Personally, my mind just checks out when they say that. So the politicizing of the gospel and the LGBT activism. He gives these as some of the reasons. I think there's others as well, but we're going to capitalize on these reasons here in just a moment. Here's a video that was put out. This was actually originally put out in January of this year. In the first week, they got 350,000 plus hits. They put it out again here in April of this year. In the first week, they got some 437,000 plus hits. They say this is that people don't see it. This is actually happening. There are people falling away from the faith. Now, the Spirit expressly says, in a lot of times, some shall depart from the faith, devoting themselves to spirits and to deceitful spirits and teachings of demons. This is actually taken right off their YouTube channel. I would suggest you go watch that. There's some things in it that I wouldn't necessarily agree with, but overall, it's a really good video, and it's got some good examples and illustrations as to what's been happening. We have this right here. This is a documentary. I've watched this documentary several times. If you can get the documentary, go ahead and get it and watch it. It's about 3 hours long. This came to me through a person within the Department of Homeland Security. It was put out by Judge Saul, who I've actually spoke to, Trevor Loudon, and the movie host Gary Pastor Gordon in 2021. This review comes to you by way of Grace Community Church. It's reviewed by Phil Johnson. There's some issues with Phil Johnson that I have with him. I'm not a real big fan of his, but I think he does a real good job in this review right here. And he states this, he says, this is part of the review. Countless Christians are being force-fed an ideology that comes from the world, not from scripture. It is being pushed in our seminaries and churches with tactics and a lot of financing taken from the secular left-wing sources. The worldview and values these change agents promote are clearly influenced by radical feminism, the sexual revolution, academic elitism, socialist tenets, and critical theory. The strongest pushback against the documentary has been the Southern Baptist Convention. This is a review by Phil Johnson of Grace Community Church, 11/20/2021. When we begin to ask ourselves the question is how could this happen? I mean, how is it that this is actually happening? All right. Well, remember, the dragon's tail has been drawing people along. All right. And I think that it started long before, but we've seen this be more prevalent now since 2017 than any time in history. I mean, you go back to the documentary that I just referenced. He goes on and talks about and mentions how, like in the last 5 or 6 years, we've seen just this massive departure from sound biblical teaching within all the institutions of Christianity. And so how does this happen? Well, WorldNet Daily, I actually got this article was sent to me while I was at a skate park with my son. WorldNet Daily, May 17th, 2020, Bob Unruh, a poll shocker. It says, you won't believe how many pastors actually have a biblical worldview. Most troubling revelation is among those who teach young people. A new poll shock has revealed that most Christian pastors believe what they want to believe. Oh my God. I have experienced that personally, and I'm going to give you some examples of that. A blending of ideas and applications from a variety of holistic worldviews into a unique but inconsistent combination that represents their personal preferences. Look at these statistics, okay? The percentage that hold a biblical worldview. Senior pastors, 41%, less than half. I actually think that number is high. Okay, associate pastors, 28%. 28% of your associate pastors hold a biblical worldview. Teaching pastors, the guy who would actually supposed to communicate the word, okay, 13%. Children and youth pastors, 12%. Executive pastors, the guys running the big churches, 2%, or was it 4%? Parents, 2%. That's the state of the church today. All right. So I'm going to give you some examples. These are personal examples. Several years ago, we had a guy who was a youth pastor at our church. He was actually a good friend of mine. And he'd been there for 13 years. And one day it was exposed that he had been involved in sexual relationships with both men and women. And further information revealed that he'd been involved in this type of lifestyle for about 26 years, 13 of which he served as a youth pastor at our church. Excuse me. 13 of which he served as a youth pastor at our church. Despite numerous complaints from people within the church, the senior pastor refused to believe that there might be an issue with this guy until it was revealed that he was essentially a switch hitter. The following Sunday, after the information came out and the big church meeting over, the following Sunday in our Sunday school class, the guy who runs the biblical counseling department at our church, he came to our church and was taking a Q&A and going through the information, giving it to our class. And during the time of that presentation, he puts forth a rhetorical question: does that mean this guy wasn't a believer all those years? And he goes on and says, no, that's not the case. Well, that's not a biblical worldview. First John would tell you that that's wrong. Okay, and this is the guy who's running the biblical counseling department at a very large church, who's even written books and done seminars all over the world. That's not a biblical worldview. All right, period. That's just not a biblical worldview. I remember a Russian woman sitting in the classroom, very attractive lady, asked the question, well, if he can do that and be considered a Christian, why can't I? Mr. Biblical Counselor didn't really have much of an answer. Okay, another woman sitting in the class said, well, if he's got this going on in his background, what do you guys have going? How do we know we can trust you? Again, deer in the headlights look. Well, we would expect that you would just trust us. Well, I have to tell you this. There was another case, actually in the same class. Actually, the guy was the class elder for 6 weeks, taught out of the book of Ephesians that you can be a believer your entire life, show no fruit, and yet you still go to heaven. And he even charted that out, what that would actually look like. And he even stated that was both he and his wife, most of their adult life up until that time, until the time when they started coming to our church. And within 3 years of coming to our church, he's on the elder board. All right? I'm going to tell you right now, that's not a biblical worldview. The people who put him on that elder board, okay, at best, he's a novice, and putting him on the elder board, that is not a biblical worldview. All right? And I remember when I started to call that out, and the heat that I took and the pressure that I got, trying to recant, or basically acknowledge that somehow or another I must have got that wrong, even though the guy taught that for 6 weeks. The same guy was later on a panel for parenting, and when it came to advice for parenting, it came to him. He literally says, "Don't do what I did." He spent his entire all the years of parenting abandoned his wife to the parenting while he pursued his career. Well, you might as well just say while he pursued money. All right. Okay. This is your guy on the elder board who's saying this. Well, why not do what you did? You got this big house, you got all this wealth and what have you, and then you can repent later on in life, and then you can sit on the elder board. Why not do what you did? I mean, that's the example that's actually being set. Okay. I remember times sitting in church and watching as we're trying to hold our kids accountable and make church a priority, what have you, and sit there and watch the chairman of the elder board and his family get up in the middle of the church service because they've got a swim meet to go to, or they got a soccer game to go to, or whatever it is. And I'm over there trying to tell my kid that, listen, we got a church over sports. All right. Okay. I mean, look at the example that he's actually setting for everybody. He sat in the front row and people could see that and they would get up and leave. So that's it. That's not a biblical worldview, ladies and gentlemen. That is not thinking and operating underneath the biblical worldview. I remember at one point in time, the senior pastor was going out of town to install a guy as a pastor. I happened to know who the guy was, and I said, "Hey, wait, he committed adultery a few years ago. And he goes, yeah, well, it's been 20 years and he's been really good with this wife, that he's got with now. And I was like, well, he was a pastor. He committed adultery with the secretary, left his wife and married the secretary. And now he's been married 20 years. You're going to say he's above reproach right now? I mean, I don't get that. And then he says, the senior pastor says to me, well, over time, God accepts that marriage. I just look at that and just go, doesn't that, well, what you're saying is if you just ding dong her enough, even God will accept it. All right. But the Bible says he's not above reproach. You look at the book of Proverbs, it says that the man who goes into his neighbor's wife, his reproach will never leave him. But the qualification for elders is that he has to be above reproach. The senior pastor's response was, well, that's only if the people know. See, folks, that is not a biblical worldview. That's not a biblical worldview. I mean, the scriptures tell us in Proverbs 2, Proverbs 5, Proverbs 7, Proverbs 9, that once you get sexually involved with somebody as a believer, there's something that happens to you. And I believe that your ability to biblically reason and to think ethically through things is severely hampered. That's why it tells us that you don't attain unto the paths of life. You don't lose your salvation, but you're always going to struggle with things. And you're going to put a guy like that in charge of a church. What a malevolent thing to do to those people. All right. We see this stuff documented all over the world through Julie Roys and the Roys Report, Rachel Denhollander and her research into Sovereign Grace Ministries and others out there who are reporting these things. And to be honest with you, folks, there has been an exponential rise in these problems in the last 5 or 6 years. I realize that there's always been apostasy. I realize that this is always, we've always had these issues, what have you, but the scriptures tells us about a specific time of apostasy. Okay, and I believe that when we look at the dragon's tail, and it says the dragon's tail is drawing people away and seducing people and what have you, then he pins them to the ground. And it's at that point in time that we begin to see the events regarding the rapture, because the scripture tells us that the apostasy takes place, the rise of the man of sin takes place. Okay, Revelation chapter 12, the sign of 2017, September 23rd, 2017. I think starting 5 years ago, we began to see the time of the great apostasy. And so I'm not an authority on anything, to be honest with you, but I'm going to say this. I think the great apostasy is underway. And it's really gotten underway in the last 3 years. And I think that with everything that we've seen and all the issue with the signs and the constellations and Revelation 12 and Daniel 8 and other scriptures and what have you, I think it's safe to say that the great apostasy is here. So, look at your elder boards. Look who's sitting on your elder boards. It's always the money guys. It's always the finance guys. All right. They're not there because they're great teachers, that they have a great knowledge in the word or anything like that. You have these big churches with these big buildings and they need people to run them. And they got these money guys sitting on the elder board. And you come in and you bring something like this and you try to call things into account. The first thing you're going to do, no matter how much of a friend you think you have on that elder board, they're going to take you out with the trash. In fact, you won't even be allowed to take out the trash. And they will get rid of you as fast as they'll marginalize you. They will, no matter what position you have in the church, they will marginalize you. They will sit on you. They will shut you up, and they will even drive you out. Okay. And I just look at this and say, you look at Isaiah chapter 66:5. We're told that those who love God, tremble at God's word, and those who love His appearing. Okay, even though there's individuals who are going to say we're going to put people out. And it says, let the Lord be glorified. We see that those people are going to be put out of the church. Okay. Those individuals who are acting, shall we say, like the prophet and saying, hey, look what's going on. Look at our churches. Look what's happening. They're going to be sat on and they're going to be called all kinds of things and what have you. But God's going to appear to their glory and to the shame of others if they're believers. And so this is a time for us to look and to call people into repentance. We want to lead people to righteousness. We want to see as much people go in the rapture as possible. We're looking at the signs, and the purpose of this is so that you won't fall away. That's our purpose in all of this. So I've given them personal examples, and maybe if you're watching this, you might know who some of the people are and what have you. I would just say they count their stars that I didn't give their names, right, in the name of their church, but they know who they are. All right. So anyway. That's it for this video. I know I've said a lot, and this video is quite long, but I think it's important to get this out there. So thank you for your time. Good day.